Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very excited to welcome Forrest Hartman back to the podcast today to talk about Escape from the Planet of the Apes, the third installment of the original Planet of the Apes series, released 50 years ago, Memorial Day weekend, 1971. How are we doing, Forrest?
I'm doing good, Brian. It's always a thrill to be on your show. And particularly with the pandemic, I haven't been doing as much film criticism outside my day job as a college professor. And as you know, I'm a big film geek. So to have the opportunity to sit down and talk film with another film geek for like an hour is a thrill for me. So
have you been to a movie theater since the pandemic began?
I have not. Yeah, since we've been pretty well locked down. We took it seriously. I'm fully vaccinated now, as is most of the family, so we probably could. Although, to be honest, I'm getting lazy, and I did subscribe to I did subscribe to HBO's service. So
there you go.
You know, I watched Wonder Woman and Godzilla versus King Kong at home. And while it's not the same as being in a theater, for a guy who's busy and such, it really hasn't been that bad. I mean, I've watched a lot of movies. I've just watched them in my house. Yeah.
I think the way to get us back is for a really great movie to open in theaters that you cannot watch at home. It has to be at the theater. I think until that day, still a lot of people are just going to stay home, right?
Well, and with things like HBO and Disney Plus, I mean, rolling out basically their theatrical releases at home. I don't get me wrong, I love theaters, but there are things about going to the theater outside of what the theater can control that I don't love, like sometimes the crowds and the behavior of other people. And to be able to sit in my living room and watch. And I'm lucky too. I have a gigantic TV and sound system and stuff, so it's a pretty good experience at home.
So this episode will be dropping Memorial Day weekend of 2021 to match up with 50 years ago, the release of Escape from the Planet of the Apes, which they had like every sequel came out like around this time, like in May of like every year they had a new one for like 4 years running. So let's see. So 2021 Memorial Day weekend, we're getting, I believe, the new Cruella de Vil movie starring Emma Stone, which they will have on Disney Plus for $30 to watch at home. But that one might get me back to the theater. I love Emma Stone. I love 101 Dalmatians. I don't really like to spend $30 to watch a movie by myself, just to like rent a movie. So that one might finally get me back. I don't know about you.
Yeah, well, probably that one, you know, who knows? We'll see. Also, being a film critic, sometimes I get screener invites, which that's been the thing that's really been interesting for me. Not that your audience cares that much, but as a critic, I'm actually, I'm getting invites from some of these places to see stuff at home. And to be honest, when I lived in Reno, where you live now, it wasn't too hard to get out and see film screenings. But I'm in a little rural Northern California area where if I want to go to the pre-screenings when they were having them regularly, I would have to drive, an hour and a half to Sacramento and back. And this whole idea that I can see films in my home and review them that way has been nice for me, I have to admit. So as much as I do like the big screen and I really want to see theaters continue to thrive, for me, from a professional end, man, being able to like review films and not drive 3 hours has been pretty great. So there's part of me that goes, I hope they at least keep that up.
Yeah, exactly. Would a really great science fiction movie get you back for us? Because that's where I wanted to start the episode today, talking about the science fiction movie genre.
I think it probably would, because with the new Star Wars films, when they started coming out, I did not do this for work, but the family and I went down to Sacramento where we could watch the movie in IMAX, just for the sake of watching it in an IMAX theater, with great sound and a big screen. So yeah, I think so. Something with a lot of spectacle that I actually imagine to be good, unlike something like, Godzilla versus King Kong had the spectacle, but
it's not going to make your top 10 list.
It's not, and I didn't have to see that on. It's like my 65-inch screen, big enough to watch monsters fight each other. But a really great sci-fi film with a lot of spectacle. Yeah, maybe a new Guardians of the Galaxy, something like that.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So science fiction movies for us, like kind of take us through your relationship with that genre in the film world. What are some of your favorites of science fiction movies that, from childhood to now, that you could share with us?
Sure. Well, much to my wife's chagrin, this is a genre that I really like. And I say much to my wife's chagrin because it's a genre that she really doesn't like. So when we're watching movies together, it's sort of like, oh, come on, please watch it. That's usually when I get my kids on board with me because they like sci-fi. Like my oldest son, Garrett, was stoked to watch the Planet of the Apes films. My wife, I think, slept through half of them because, she's like, hey, there's apes on screen. Good time to take a nap. But going back, I already mentioned it. I love the Star Wars franchise, which, a lot of people look at the original Star Wars as a Western in space. And since you've usually had me on talking about Westerns, everybody will expect me to mention that. But
we have to mention Westerns at some point. Forrest has been on twice before the regular podcast talking about the Westerns, Monty Walsh and Little Big Man. So finally have got you on today talking about not a Western. It took a while, but we made it happen.
But I made the connection there with Star Wars. I basically love the Star Wars franchise. I think like everybody who's a fan of Star Wars, there are movies that work for me. There are movies that don't, but I still have a fondness in my heart for the entire franchise. I love the original 1977 film. I think I could quote it almost line for line when I was 10 years old. And, I love The Empire Strikes Back, and I like the other Star Wars films to varying degrees, depending on which one we're talking about. Probably if we get outside the Star Wars universe, which is somewhat more maybe even fantasy than sci-fi, my favorite sci-fi film of all time would be Blade Runner.
Okay.
The original Blade Runner. Love Blade Runner.
Which of the 17 versions of the film do you like the best?
Oh, I'm
no, there's like 3, right?
Yeah, I think the original theatrical cut worked fine for me.
Okay.
That's what made me fall in love with the film. I always find it interesting when they go back and recut stuff, but the original film worked just fine for me, and that's nostalgically how I remember it. So I'll say that one.
Yeah, that's a great one. Ridley Scott, obviously very well known for science fiction. Right before that, he did Alien, also very famous. Do you like Alien, his original?
I do, not as much as Blade Runner, but I do. I do think Alien's quite good too. What's funny is Alien is obviously a science fiction film, but I always thought of it more as a horror film because he does such a good job with suspense. But it is a sci-fi film and a great movie. So yeah, I like both of those. Brazil, Terry Gilliam, I think I can call that sci-fi, right?
That's like a mix of every genre. I feel like that movie.
I wasn't sure about that one. It's a film that I love. In fact, I need to revisit it since I haven't watched it for a while, but I would argue that it's sci-fi-ish and I can throw it in there. Also, before going on this podcast, I Googled what, greatest sci-fi films of all time just to see what other people were talking about. And that didn't show up on anybody's list. And I'm like, well, I gotta throw it out there to give it
something new.
Yeah. I'm a big Star Trek fan, which of course started with TV. But I like Wrath of Khan from the original cast. I really enjoyed the reboots where Chris Pine is playing Kirk, and we've got Carl Urban on all those great guys. I like a variety of sci-fi. Christopher Nolan's Inception, I think, is pretty brilliant. The Martian,
yes,
love The Martian with Matt Damon, which of course, that's what's interesting about sci-fi. I've taken us into, I feel like, a lot of different genres, right? Like the Martian is sort of serious science fiction, and Star Wars is like fantasy science fiction, and then Brazil and Blade Runner are what, dystopian science fiction. Yeah. So that's probably enough to get you going, right?
Yeah, The Martian came out in 2015. That was the year of my favorite science fiction film of the last decade. Did you see Ex Machina, directed by Alex Garland?
I did. That's a good film.
That's also a really good one. I always think about that was like the one film I saw in a theater that year that just completely blew me away. I knew nothing about it going in. I hadn't even seen a trailer. I think I just read a review that said it was really interesting, so I went and checked it out, and I was like, this is amazing. I feel like we don't get as many really great science fiction movies these days that are not based on other properties, like just like really original science fiction movies are very few and far between now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, because I'm getting old partially. I Google, like I said, I Googled because often what I do is coming off the top of my head. I remember my absolute favorites, but sometimes I'll forget like a really great film, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to leave out my best. But yeah, when I was Googling like great science fiction films, I found the lists, and of course the people making the lists could do what I'm talking about and have forgotten things, but going from about 2000 on, there was some good stuff, but not as much great stuff as I would have thought for a 20-year span. And so unless both me and the people who compiled these lists are forgetting things, I think you're right. It's like, yeah, we've had good movies, but not as many as you would expect from a genre like that over 2 decades.
Yeah, exactly. So what has been your relationship with the Planet of the Apes series? What are your like early memories? Did you see like the first one first? Did you catch another one later? Like, what do you remember?
I it's been so long ago, I really don't remember, because the original Planet of the Apes came out, of course, in 1968.
Yep.
And that's the year I was born.
Okay.
So, I'm 53. So I obviously, unless my parents took me into a theater and didn't tell me about it, I did not see that film. And I kind of doubt it, because I think it came out in April. I was born in February. So I would have been.
You've been very young. It could have been your first film in a theater.
It could have been. But what I remember more about that era, I did have some Planet of the Apes action figures, like the big cool ones we used to have. So I know I watched it. I think, and I could be completely wrong about this, I believe I probably watched them for the first time, at least the first couple, on TV. How they would trot out the TV rights, because I remember having these action figures. I certainly remember being aware of the films as a kid. I don't think I was really reading in all the ideology and messaging that they had in them as a kid, but I did have the action figures and stuff. So I suspect it's one of those things where I watched one on TV after the television rights came out, and were like, oh, that was cool. So
yeah, you might have seen. So the fifth film in the series came out in 1973, and then I believe after that there was both a live action series and an animated series on TV in the 70s. If you were a kid in the 70s, you might have seen some of those.
I vaguely remember that animated series, and I've got to say, I don't have the world's best memory for stuff like that. I don't know why, but I do remember the animated series being on. It was never one of my like absolute favorites, but I remember seeing it and watching episodes and things like that.
So the original film Planet of the Apes came out in April of 68. Do you know what other famous science fiction movie came out the same day?
I do not. You're gonna tell me.
2001: A Space Odyssey came out the same day.
Well, that's why.
What a weekend for science fiction fans! Oh my God. Can you imagine?
That's why I don't know, because I'm the lone film critic in the world who does not love 2001: A Space Odyssey.
So you don't like 2001? Do you like appreciate anything about it, like the visuals and some of that stuff?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's one of the most beautiful films probably ever made in terms of visuals. In fact, I think if you were to watch 2001 next to Planet of the Apes and focus on the aesthetics and what a great job Stanley Kubrick did in world building, I mean that movie I think is ahead of its time in terms of visual design and arts. Beautiful. My problems are more with the storytelling. I mean, I think that thing is long. I don't know how many times I've watched it or tried to watch it, probably at least 3. And I still am falling asleep by the time we get to the third act.
I think the only way to watch that is in a theater here in Reno in 2017. It did a week at the local IMAX screen. So I went and paid the $13-14, whatever it was, to see it. And I got up real close to the screen. And it was a pretty extraordinary experience to watch that on a giant IMAX, and just beautiful, looked absolutely stunning.
For sure. Yeah. And certainly people who love the film, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I mean, obviously all the criticism over the years would say I'm the one who's wrong. I just never warmed to it. And interestingly, if you go back though, the film was not super well received when it came out into theaters. What I'm saying about it is more of what critics were saying when it was originally released. But
yeah, I think there were some walkouts when it first came out. There were people I'm out of here.
There were a lot of critics even that panned that film for being, overlong and things like that. And I still think some of that criticism holds, but it is a beautiful work of art. And so, it's one of those films that I say, hey, if you love it, great. I'm the last one to say I'm smarter than Stanley Kubrick was, because I'm sure I'm not.
That would be a great argument to have. I am much smarter than Stanley Kubrick ever was. But yeah, so that same month, we got the first Planet of the Apes. And then 1970 to 1973, we get a sequel every year. Today, we're talking about the third installment. This one's really fun. This is where three of the apes travel back in time to 1970s Los Angeles. So the third film kind of flips the first film, which I've always found really interesting. So if you haven't seen the third one, this is kind of just a brief summary of what it's about. So following the events of 1970s Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which ended, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, with Taylor, played by Charlton Heston, essentially like blowing up the Earth. In the second film, it seemed like at the end, Forrest, they were like, we're going to end the series here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it certainly didn't seem like we had 3 more movies to come after that.
So, yeah, I always wonder about that. Like, what was the thinking behind that? I mean, the first one was very successful. The second one, I'm assuming they planned to be successful. Why would they have written themselves into that corner? I mean, it ultimately worked out. They were able to come up with the one idea that could take the series forward, but he basically blows up the Earth at the end of the second one. But Cornelius and Zira, 2 of the major ape characters from the first 2 films, they managed to board Taylor's spacecraft and flee back through time to 1970s Los Angeles, where they face what Taylor faced in the first film, a world totally unlike their own, the one they're used to. They're received with suspicion and fascination from the people they meet. But when it turns out that Zira is pregnant and might produce more intelligent apes that can talk, fear gets the better of more than a few humans. And soon, Zira and Cornelius are on the run for their lives, kind of like the basic idea of the third one. Although there is a lot of humor in the third one, too. I feel like almost more than we get in the other installments, at least in the original series. Anything else you want to add to this short summary of the movie?
No, I think you did a pretty nice job. I mean, the thing that strikes me about the film is what you already said, that it basically flips the first one, that it's like, okay, we're sticking a human on this planet dominated by apes. And now it's like, well, let's put some intelligent apes on a planet dominated by humans and, flip the script and have the apes, who were human psychologists, meaning they studied animals on their planet, being studied by humans who study animals. So it was, very, very interesting.
I actually think one of the reasons why the second movie ends with Charlton Heston blowing up the Earth is I think he really did not want to have to come back for another installment.
Yeah.
Did you notice
how much script control he had? But
yeah, I mean, I don't know. But did you notice in the second one how he disappears from the movie 5 minutes in and then he's not in it till the very end? I don't know if he was under contract to do a sequel or something, but he did not want to do a second one. And they kind of like forced him into doing Beneath.
I got to be honest. I don't know much of the business, the business end of that. I haven't read up on it, but it did seem from, watching those films again, like years later. I mean, I got that impression. I mean, I almost Googled it because I'm like, so yeah, Charlton Heston, big star, not in very much of this movie.
And what's so weird, what's so weird about the second one is that then they get another actor who looks very similar to Charlton Heston, beard and all, and he basically just takes over the Heston role for the movie. And that always just struck me as weird. Even as a kid, I'm like, wait, that's not the same guy, that's someone else.
I honestly, I mean, and I know what Charlton Heston looks like. For a minute I was like, is that Charlton? I was like, what they do to him? Like, because you're right, it was close enough, right? I'm just like, wait, that's not Charlton Heston.
Yeah. So Charlton Heston, he wanted out of the series so bad that years later for us, he came back and appeared in another Planet of the Apes. You know which one he came back for?
I should, but I can't recall. Actually, it's got to be the Tim Burton one.
The Tim Burton one, he plays like an aging ape. He's in the ape makeup, like dying in bed for like one scene. It's a cameo in the Tim Burton version.
Yeah.
So he finally came back. I don't know if he got paid a lot for that or if he just insisted, if you're making a new one, I must be a part of the production.
But. Well, it's probably one of those things, sort of like, I don't know if I ever told you the story. I interviewed Leonard Nimoy about, there was a period in his life where he was bummed being typecast as Spock, but then he came to terms with it and said, hey, Spock did a lot of things for a lot of people, and he was happy about it. Charlton Heston might have done the same thing, right? As you get older, looking back, he wanted nothing but to get out of the franchise at that point. But looking back, it's like, a lot of people remember me for get your hands off me, you dirty ape. So when a new one pops up, he's like, I got to be part of it.
I like when actors, sometimes, they're not in some of the sequels, but then later on, 20, 30, 40 years on, they come back for one, like Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, who pushed against horror films for years so she could break out of the genre and do other things. And then not only comes back for the 20th anniversary sequel, she came back for the 40th anniversary sequel. So the 60th anniversary sequel is going to be just the best one. It's going to be fantastic.
Everybody will come back. It'll be like the upcoming Spider-Man. Everybody will be in it.
Everybody who's played Spider-Man will be in the same movie. All right. So Beneath the Planet of the Apes came out, I believe it was Memorial Day weekend, 1970. And then a year, almost to the day, they released the third one, which is called Escape from the Planet of the Apes. This film was written by Paul Den. He also wrote Beneath. He also wrote the fourth installment, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. And the last film he scripted was 1974's Murder on the Orient Express. So he was a really great, prolific screenwriter doing some really cool stuff before he passed away in 1976. The film was directed by Don Taylor. He worked mostly in television, but he did direct a few other feature films like Tom Sawyer and Damien Omen Part 2. He also worked as an actor. He appeared in Billy Wilder's Stalag 17 before becoming a director. So those are the screenwriter and director of Escape from the Planet of the Apes. You're very familiar with their work, for
not with all of their work. Certainly not.
You haven't studied their filmographies on a quiet Sunday morning.
Not
Don
all
Taylor.
Of them, no. I'm familiar with Rod Serling, who helped out with the first one, right?
Yeah, Rod Serling wrote the first movie. I don't think Rod Serling had anything to do with the sequels. I think he just did the first one.
Yeah. From what I've seen, you're correct.
Yeah,
I was actually surprised by that, though, rewatching these films, because somehow it had escaped me that Rod Serling had been involved in that first one. I was like, Rod Serling, okay.
He's known for The Twilight Zone, and a lot of people I think forget that he wrote the screenplay to the first Planet of the Apes, which is fantastic. So his name is on a really great classic science fiction movie, not just television. Let's see. Kim Hunter and Roddy McDowall return to play Zira and Cornelius. Hunter played the role in the second film too, but McDowall had only at this point appeared in the first movie. Another actor played Cornelius in Beneath, and that's why I think he's not in it very much. You mostly just see her in that film. Kim Hunter is the only actor to play the same character in 3 films in the original Ape series. Because Roddy McDowall is in parts 4 and 5, but he plays the son Milo, who we meet at the very end of Escape. Roddy McDowall plays Milo in movies 4 and 5.
Right. Yeah. And playing an ape in these days, I mean, for anybody who hasn't watched these films in a long time, is a lot different than playing an ape today. Right.
Yeah.
Where it's all motion capture and you're sort of, they're modeling things on your facial expressions. I mean, they're full on in practical get-ups and stuff. So that must have been a process.
Yeah, I mean, just think about that first movie for us, the 68, where, I mean, that makeup was revolutionary at the time. And I mean, there's behind the scenes documentaries I've watched in the past where like they couldn't really eat lunch. Like, once they were in the makeup, they just had to they had to sip through a straw. And if they bent it the wrong way, it would break the makeup. So it was like kind of tedious and hours and hours of makeup to get done.
Different thing than like Andy Serkis is doing in the new Planet of the Apes movies, where you see him, they've got him in a green unitard, right, with a bunch of balls all over him, and that seems easier and better to me. But that said, that makeup is still pretty impressive. I watched it with my oldest son, and I mean, it holds up pretty well. I mean, obviously it doesn't look as ape realistic as the CGI that we have today, but it's pretty good. I mean, it's good enough that it doesn't suck you out of the film. So I still like it.
The only bad makeup, at least in the first three films, are did you notice any of the crowd scenes in Beneath? They saved money by putting masks on all the extras. So if you look closely at when the camera pans a big group of apes, you see just these hollow eyes, and it's clearly masks on like 80% of them.
Yeah.
But they had to save money. They were like, how do we save money in the third film? What if it's only 2 or 3 apes and the rest of it is just LA modern day humans?
Well, so it wasn't Charlton Heston, Brian. What you're saying is they blew up the planet of the apes so they could save money on makeup.
Exactly. No, we'll never know exactly how that went down. But so a few more bits of trivia on this third installment. Did you know this? I did not know this until researching the movie yesterday for us. Do you know who plays the third ape who dies early in the movie?
You know what? Yes, Sal Mineo.
Yeah.
And I did not know that. I mean, I did not know that going in. I saw the credits roll.
Okay.
And I was like, what? So I was as surprised as you, although I watched the film last night because I knew we were going to be talking about it and saw his name scroll up and saw that it was Milo. And I'm like, oh man.
Yeah. Yes. Is it Mineo or Mineo? I never know which way to say it.
Sal. I have always said Mineo, but I could be wrong.
So he's obviously famous for Rebel Without a Cause, starring James Dean, which I mentioned on a previous episode. I very explicitly said that it came out in 1956. Came out in 1955. I'm sorry for anybody who's listened to a previous episode. It was just like that part in Jurassic Park where John Hammond says, when Disneyland opened in 1956, nothing worked. And he says it very like 1956. Disneyland, of course, opened in 1955. So I've never quite understood. But then I did the same thing. So I apologize, everybody. Rebel Without a Cause from 1955, Sal Mineo. He had parts in films and things here and there, but I guess in the early 70s, his career was really struggling. And so he agreed to be in this movie in the hopes that it would restart his career, much as the first film had done for McDowall, who had a kind of a period in the mid 60s of not appearing in too many films. However, Mineo found the makeup extremely uncomfortable. And that's why the script was rewritten to kill off his character earlier than planned. I think that character was meant to die at some point, but I guess it happened earlier in the movie than planned because he just could not stand the makeup, which I found really interesting. This was his final theatrical film before he was murdered in February of 1976 at the age of 37. So it's really tragic ending to his life there. It's awful.
Yeah, a tragic story. And but yeah, again, I was as surprised as you last night to see him in that film. So
so I mean he's a part of like a great legacy, so there's that, right? I mean, all of these films are so popular to this day.
And he's really good in this film as far as, like I said, it's hard rating the performances of the actors playing apes is difficult because, I mean, obviously they're doing all the voice work, but I again, hopefully some of your listeners will watch the movies, but I mean, the actors are really obscured in this makeup. So it's all about gestures and voice and things like that. Almost like doing an animated film, I would think. They probably could have done something like they did with Darth Vader in the Star Wars, right? If they wanted, you could have had physical actors and voice actors and probably pulled it off.
Yeah, I think on one of the documentaries I watched many years ago, Kim Hunter said it was tricky because you're trying to, have an emotional pull with the audience and really convey what your character's thinking, but you also have to like move your eyes and your mouth like this, because if you're not doing that, the makeup looks very stiff. And so you have to be constantly moving your facial muscles to make the makeup not look so, still and awkward on the screen, especially if the camera's lingering on one of the characters for too long. So it's like two parts of a performance.
It must have been a weird thing for an actor when you talk about that. I mean, to upplay the performances, how difficult, because I'm sure like what you're talking about there with like you're making the makeup work essentially. That's not something you would be trained to do as an actor for any other role, right? Like if you're doing that stuff with your face for your standard close up, people are gonna like, what the heck are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, are you having a stroke or?
Yeah.
So,
If Kim Hunter had been doing that as Stella in A Streetcar Named Desire, I don't know if she would have won the Academy Award.
Yeah, exactly. So I can see that being quite a challenge, right? You'd almost have to watch the dailies, I think, and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I got to be moving my forehead more. Or,
and I think by the third film, especially Kim Hunter, she'd done 2 before. So I'm assuming by the third film, she had it down, like how to do it in a way where, she could figure out how to, express her emotions and give a good performance and not have to fixate so much on the makeup itself while acting. Right. But, Roddy McDowall had taken, I can't remember why he wasn't in the second film. I'm really glad they got him back for the third film, because there's a difference. Like, he is such a great actor. Like, he really comes through, especially his fantastic voice. So 2 other things about the movie for us I thought were interesting. So I always wondered this watching the third film. I'm always wondering, like, why does it start on the beach? Why don't we actually see them taking off from the future Earth? I guess not only was that in the script for the third movie, they actually shot the scene and then later deleted it. So the early script, it showed them viewing the dying Earth from their spaceship before it goes back in time. The scene was shot. I watched there's a short documentary on the Blu-ray of the third film, and there's like stills of them shooting that scene, black and white stills. But I guess the effects were never completed. And ultimately, they decided it had more shock value, had more impact to open the movie on the beach and, open it with all those guys showing up. And they're like, welcome to Earth or whatever. And then they take the helmets off. And it's such a great reveal right when we get the title. I thought, like, the way they opened the third film, it makes sense because it would have taken away the power of that scene on the beach. So it makes sense. But I always wondered, but they actually did shoot that scene. I always wondered that if they'd actually thought about putting that in the script or the film.
Yeah, I agree with that choice. So, I mean, they could have maybe done the spaceship as a flashback or something,
or a flashback,
describing what happened. But I agree with not seeing them take off, because you're right, that reveal on the beach. I mean, of course, we know about it now, and anybody listening to this podcast knows about it. But I mean, if you were going into theaters, with no idea what's going on, I mean, that would be pretty crazy when they took the helmets off, right?
Yeah, because you can't assume everybody's sitting down for this third film in 71. Not everybody would have seen the second one. So I think it's a better, especially for those audience members who had somehow missed the second one, it's a much better opening for them than just starting, speaking of Jamie Lee Curtis, like Halloween 2 style, where we just start from like the previous scene and then go right into I think for the third film, it makes sense to start afresh on like Earth in the 70s. Makes more sense. And apparently the beach that we start the film in, it's the same beach where Charlton Heston drops to his knees and sees the Statue of Liberty in the first movie. Did you know that? I didn't know that.
No, I didn't know that either. Yeah.
They use the same beach. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, it's not something I guess they could really give away in the third film. I don't know what there is like about the beach. I mean, you wouldn't see the Statue of Liberty yet. So
right.
It wouldn't make sense. Right. It's in the last thing. All 5 original Planet of the Apes movies opened at number 1 at the box office. So I guess Planet of the Apes beat out 2001. I guess judging by that.
Like I say, you remember it was not beloved, that film when it opened.
I could see the families going to Planet of the Apes at opening weekend, not 2001. like with the kids.
Yeah,
makes sense. And when Beneath the Planet of the Apes became a hit in 1970, producer Arthur P. Jacobs sent a telegram to screenwriter Paul Den, which said, "Apes exist. Sequel required." That's all it said. But I feel like once you're like the head screenwriter of a sequel, you have to just be prepared. Like that telegram is coming.
Oh, sure.
To write another one. So have an idea in the back. I believe he had the idea of the third movie like before it came out. I don't think it was one of those situations where the second film opened was a hit and then he had to sit there and be like, oh my God, the Earth blew up. What do I do? I think he had an idea of, if there were to be a third installment, he had an idea of bringing Zira and Cornelius back.
Right.
Which would have been important, because then it would be like a state of anxiety of like, what do I do? I killed everybody.
Right.
But so yeah, those are all our bits of trivia. Unless you have anything else for us, let's talk about Escape. So what did you think? What is your opinion of the third film in the original series? What did you make of this one?
Well, I mean, I think it's imperfect in some ways, but it's still a fair amount of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think I should note that I think you could watch this film without watching the two prior movies and still enjoy it as well, because
Mm-hmm.
it's the story of three initially people who end up in a foreign place and are trying to adapt. So it's got sort of universal themes, and like you said, it's sort of a flipping of the first film, but I think you're going to enjoy it more if you've watched the previous two films, because at that point these ape characters, and
Mm-hmm.
you're familiar with them and what they're like. There are a few scenes that I found myself going, oh, I wonder what they I wonder why they chose to do that. That's a little bit bizarre. And there are points where I think the relatively comedic underpinnings of 70% of the movie are it's sort of shocking when we get to the end, right? There's a dramatic change in tone in this
Yes.
movie, and I'm not sure that director Don Taylor really reconciled that as well as could be done. That said, what strikes me, like revisiting these films after a long time, is they're pretty dark movies, like
Mm-hmm.
all of them, really. I mean, every single one. They take on some really interesting philosophical themes.
Mm-hmm.
They really get you thinking about humanity and violence and the way we treat animals and the way we treat
Mm-hmm.
each other, and that continues in the third film. So I like that a lot. I really like the thematic elements in the movie. I
Mm-hmm.
I like the actors. I think Kim Hunter and Roddy McDowall are great, and I think the people who aren't wearing makeup that they put around them, Bradford Dillman and Natalie Trundy, I think they have a
Mm-hmm.
nice ensemble around them as well. So I enjoyed it. I don't think it's as good as the 1968
Mm-hmm.
Planet of the Apes, but I think it's a worthy
Mm-hmm.
a worthy follow up, and it's certainly interesting enough to suggest that people watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is easily my favorite of the sequels of the original series. Like, I have some issues with Beneath. There's some things I like in it. It's very all over the place. I think Charlton Heston brings that movie down a little bit just because of the weird structure of the story and how he disappears and then comes back at the end. And I mean, speaking of dark endings, I mean, the second one, it just ends on such a dismal, like,
Oh
okay.
yeah.
And there's even like a final narration, like, and that was the end of the world as they knew it. And then that's like, you're like, okay. So everybody's walking out of that one really in a great mood. But you're right. I mean, all three of them end with this like kind of dark shocker twist. The first one obviously ending with him dropping to his knees and realizing, oh my God, I'm still on Earth. I never went anywhere. I just went into our future. And then he's like, he's just screaming like, ah.
Yeah.
And then the third one, you're right. I mean, that I made that note. I have only a few criticisms of Escape, and one of them is the tonal shifts could have been a little bit better handled. I mean, the middle part of the movie, it's almost like this comedy, like light, bouncy montages of them trying on clothes, and I really like all of that stuff. But then there is this turn. It comes really quickly, and then it's so dark at the end. It's so depressing the way this movie ends. I mean, you get a little bit of a kicker in that last scene where you're like, okay, there is some promise of new life and something to come. But Don Taylor, he really makes you just love these characters. We've been with Zira and Cornelius for 3 films. We love them together, and the way this movie ends, it's so tragic, and you're just like, I guess it had to end that way. I don't know how you do the 4th film by keeping Zira and Cornelius just hanging around the refinery for another movie. I mean, it makes sense, but the ending always gets me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it does explore interesting themes, but it's interesting. This movie reminded me in some ways of Star Trek 4, the Voyage Home, if you remember, where the original cast of Star Trek goes back to San
You go to
Francisco,
Earth, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and they've got to save whales and things. And that movie was always, I mean, I thought it was a good Star Trek movie, but it was like a light one, right? It's like, oh yeah, you know, we had the thing where Spock had died, and they'd recovered Spock, and a really kind of dark twist. And then it's like, hey, we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna go back to Earth. And it was just sort of light and fun. And to me, the Escape from the Planet of the Apes really started with that vibe. I'm like, oh, cool. They're doing a, you know, Star Trek The Voyage Home thing, but it doesn't end that way. You know, and that's what I'll say. The Voyage Home, you know, maintains that tone throughout the whole movie. But there's a particular shift in Escape from the Planet of the Apes, and that's the only thing that did not entirely work for me. In fact, I don't want to give too much away for the people. I mean, we've talked about where the film's going, I think, which is okay in a podcast like this. But when Zira and Cornelius go on the run, the thing that sends them on the run, I that seemed out of character for the characters for me too. So I had a bit of a problem with that plot twist.
Okay.
That directly led to the tonal shift, and that's my main complaint about the film. So.
Okay. You're talking about like their escape, like when they actually get out of the.
Oh yeah, when Cornelius fights with the orderly, and then it's like we got it. Yeah, you know,
that was kind of a screenwriting thing, right? We needed to raise the stakes with something that Cornelius does, right? I get it, but yeah, it's a little bit clunky.
Yeah, I mean, it was I thought it was a little over the top and a little bit of out of character for you know, what we had seen from these characters previously. But you know, by no means does that mean I'm condemning it and saying don't see the film. That's just my biggest issue with it. My one real complaint.
Yeah, what I love about these movies, and it carries into the new trilogy too, so many interesting thematic ideas. They take their time. It's you'd think by the third film they could have just said, okay, we're just going to do an action kind of chase movie and not really take the time to discuss issues that, you know, that the first movie did so well. And you still get that in the third movie, you know, talking about, you know, do we kill, like the kind of the villain of the film, like, do I kill Zira and Cornelius because I'm afraid of what might happen if they stay alive? And then they even talk about like Hitler, like, would you go back and kill it? I mean, some of these ideas that the movie brings up for a third film and like a science fiction family series, like there's some really interesting thematic issues. The movie takes its time. It's never rushing. There's not like where I feel like, okay, slow it down. Like we really get, you know, lots of great scenes with Cornelius and Zira, and the movie I feel like is always kind of at the right pace, even towards the end. We're not rushing. We're spending time with these characters who we love.
Yeah, I love those thematic ideas that you talk about. In fact, my son Garrett, after William Wyndon, who plays the president, you know, he's having some of these discussions you talk about, you know, well, these apes haven't done anything to us. Why, you know, it seems like an overreaction. Like you say, the whole, would you kill Hitler as an infant? Garrett's watching that and going, that guy's way overqualified to be president. He's like, no real life president would be that thoughtful. And I'm like, well, it's hard to argue with that, Garrett. But yeah, you know what I mean. But yeah, the ideas in all of these films are really smart, and they do make you think, which is what I think that's what makes a horror film or a science fiction film great in my mind. It's not just about having fun. That's part of it. But if they're having fun and making you think about bigger real world ideas, that's a good film.
Yeah, and the movie is fun, and it's like I like the lighthearted tone of lots of it. Like I felt like if this had been dark all the way through and right from the beginning, you know, the government's coming in and they're experimenting on Zira and Cornelius, turned into like this dark, you know, depressing movie, I don't think it would be as good. I like that, you know, they're become celebrities and people are cheering when they walk down the sidewalk, and you know, she's showing off her new clothes. Like I like all of that stuff. I think it's fun. I think you need to. I don't think you want to take it too seriously by the third film, especially with the concept of them coming to Earth. And you know, I was like, okay, if this actually happened, I don't know if they would become celebrities. I don't know if we'd actually find out they exist. I feel like in 2021 they'd like hide these creatures like from the public. I don't know.
Well, I feel sort of like Garrett that the president that they show is far more thoughtful than what we see a lot of times from leadership. And I'm not trying to get partisan, but like you, I'm like, Yeah, I don't know that there's a point where they say, well, we can't just hide this from the world. We got to let people know. And I'm like, I think if most powerful government figures found out about sentient talking apes and they thought they could successfully hide them from the public, from what I've seen in from the things I've seen the government try to hide from the American public, I think they would hide them if they could.
And then finding out, like, they held like a court session and Zira says, well, from where I used to be, I used to dissect humans. I think that's when they would say, okay, maybe we don't let these people out. And I love the villain character when she says, we come from your future, and the guy sits back and he's like, it's the only thing that makes sense, because naturally that's where you would go. Oh, well, of course, that's the only solution here, is that they came from our future back in time, right? That's where everyone would go, right?
Yeah, another thing I like about the film, though, is although he is the villain, he's not entirely unsympathetic, right? I mean, I think that's another thing that's smart about these movies, is that I mean, he's the villain because we know these apes and we like them and we want them to be okay. We know they're kind-hearted, but he doesn't, and I think that's made clear. And his actions, although they seem villainous in the scope of the story, are understandable, right? Like he's a villain that you can understand where he's coming from, like what he's thinking. And to me, movies like that are always better than just like, hey, there's the guy with the dark hat, hate him, you know?
A lot of villains, and I mean, in all kinds of genres, they're just bad to be bad. And this one, I mean, even at the beginning when we meet him, he's charismatic. He's trying to understand them at first. And it's really later in the movie where he comes to understand, if I let them live, it could mean really, really bad things for all the human race as a whole. I need to take this on myself and wipe them out and this kid. And even though it's awful and the ending is so tragic, you kind of understand where he's coming from, which makes it more of an interesting film. Yeah, exactly. His name is Eric Braeden, played that role. He's also, I recognized him watching it again. I think he has a very brief role in Titanic, as like a very there's like a funny joke. I think DiCaprio says something to him, and it cuts to him, and he goes, "Oh yes," and it's like this little tiny moment in Titanic. I'm seeing so many. I just recorded an episode a few days ago about another actor who showed up in one scene of a movie we talked about, who's also in Titanic. So any actors from like the 70s, like eventually they make their way to the James Cameron 1997 film.
Oh yeah.
He had a big cast to work with.
You should start a new thing. What was it? Is it 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon?
6 Degrees of Titanic.
Yeah, exactly. But you got to be different. 5 degrees of Titanic, right?
Yeah. Cold, very cold degrees. Oh my gosh. Like a Kevin Bacon, that you could just, if you did the Kevin Bacon one as a podcast, you could talk about every movie, right?
Yeah.
Starting from the beginning of cinema to now.
Yeah.
And that guy still pops up in movies too, Kevin Bacon, to this day. And when he's in a big ensemble film today, I'm like, oh, it just adds to the add it to the list.
Yeah. So now he's in commercials too, right? So so he's really
now he's everywhere. And I actually got to meet him once, so I'm 1 degree away, so that's kind of cool.
I got to interview him once.
Did you get
via phone? So we're both there. So anybody who knows us, hey.
Yeah, I went to a screening of a movie nobody saw that he directed in 2006 called Loverboy, that his wife Kira Sedgwick played the star of. It just like came and went in theaters, but I went to a screening and he was there to introduce it. And Sandra Bullock, my favorite, Sandra Bullock, did 1 day's work on the movie. She has a very brief role in the middle of it. So in this crowded theater for us, I stood up, I raised my hand for the Q&A afterwards, and I said, how'd you get Sandra Bullock to be in this movie? And he said, oh, we're very close friends. And then after the movie ended, I ran up to him to get a picture, and he was not having it for us. He was like, no pictures, but I still kind of took one with him. And this was the face he made when I took he was like, did not even crack a smile. That's my Kevin Bacon story.
He was very kind to me. We were on a phone conversation, though. I don't even, to be honest, I don't even remember what project it was anymore. I remember talking to him, and
one of his gazillion projects.
But it was a different thing. He was like selling his work to me, right? That's it.
Yeah, was not quite the case with me. Kevin Bacon should be in a Planet of the Apes. That could also add to his pedigree. I feel like he hasn't done a whole lot of science fiction. I mean, I guess there's Apollo 13, which is kind of more of a drama than it is science fiction. But
yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. Add to his long list of.
He's more of a drama guy.
His filmography. Although he has done some horror films that I like Stir of Echoes. So back to Escape. What does Don Taylor bring to the movie as director? So I guess he didn't direct the first two. So that would also be interesting to come aboard a series like this. You haven't been a part of the first two films as a director. Kind of, what do you think he did well in Escape? Or not well?
Well, I think he did as well as one could with maintaining the consistency, certainly of those characters. But I mean, you've got to think that Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter had a lot to do with that too, right? Mm-hmm. Since they had established them so well. I don't know, as we established at the outset, that much about Don Taylor. So I would assume if I was a director in his position, I would kind of back off and let my two stars do their thing.
Right.
I think he does a nice job bringing a sense of humor to the film. Again, we've already established, I don't love the tonal shift at the end. I think that could have been smoothed out. Mm-hmm. I also don't think that it's fair to lay all of that on him. I think part of that's probably the writing, part of that's probably your shooting schedule and your budget and a lot of stuff like that. But I think he does a nice job. I mean, making us feel like we're still in the same world, right?
Yes.
That's the biggest problem with jumping into a sequel as a new person, I think, is that you risk everything's different. Nobody believes you're still in the same world. It's like, oh, new guy took over. And I don't get that sense at all, right? It still feels like it's the same Planet of the Apes universe, even though we're seeing a drastic time shift for everybody but the two main characters.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it works when they have new directors for the same series, like Mission Impossible did that, like where they would bring on somebody new and it would have a different look and a new style. And that could be fun sometimes. But yeah, I think Escape needed to feel like a continuation from the first two movies. So stylistically, it was totally different and it had a different look and style and editing. It just would not have flowed as well. And I think you needed that to stay consistent from the first two movies. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the one thing he does really well is he stays out of the way. He knows he's got two great actors. They've done at least, Kim Hunter had done two and Roddy McDowall had done one before this. So they knew kind of their characters and he just lets the movie breathe. He's not moving things too fast. He lets it breathe, lets us really spend time with the two apes that we love. And so, yeah, I mean, he's not giving us anything revolutionary as a director, but I don't think we needed that for this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to know how much, I mean, unless you're really tuned into the process of filming, how much of it was the screenwriter, how much of it was the director, how much, but I agree with you. I mean, there's nothing that he does that I see as terribly problematic that you would say that was definitely the director. The director screwed that one up. I mean, like you say, he kind of stays out of the way and lets the story and who knows if he was involved in doctoring the script or anything like that. Like, maybe he actually helped flesh it out and stuff. Maybe he's like, oh, we're not spending enough time on this. So that's where it's really hard to decide how much credit a director gets, unless you're on the set or have sources you can trust telling you what happened on set, right?
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, like one weird thing the movie does is Milo's death at the very beginning when he's pinned by that gorilla. And then it has this weird like editing montage where it cuts to like 20 animals like looking in panic, because this movie's rated PG, right? They couldn't really show the death of Milo. So we cut to this montage of animals like screaming and looking crazed. And I'm like, is that Don Taylor's weird choice for that? Or is that the editor like months later, like, oh, he didn't really shoot enough coverage here for Milo's death. How do I get this across to the audience? That might not have had anything to do with Don Taylor. So we don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes with movie ratings, I honestly don't know as much about how the system worked then as it does now. I mean, maybe that's not the cut until it got in front of the ratings board, and and then like you're saying, it's like, oh yeah, you can't do that, So it's like, well,
right.
what do we do? Well, I'll just throw together a montage, and then there'll be less blood. So yeah, so sometimes it's stuff like that. If assuming the ratings board work the way it does now, because you'll get that, right? You'll submit a cut of a film and they'll say, yeah, well, this cut's R. Well, I need a PG-13. Okay, well then, here are your problematic areas.
Yeah, I've heard stories on like audio commentaries and interviews of directors. They make their film, they feel really good about it, and then the last step is to go through the MPAA and they give it an NC-17. Right. And they say, okay, these 67 things have to go. And the director's like, oh, seriously? And it's a back and forth for months, like just trying to get it down to an R. I mean, can you imagine, Forrest, you spend a year plus on a movie and you feel like you got it right. It's really great. And then this last little step, you have to basically, take out parts of the movie you like just to suit this board of people who say it's not, we do not allow this to be seen by adult audiences.
I can, not to go on a tangent, but it was one of my problems with the rating system, right? I mean, I think it's why we have R-rated films that are basically NC-17 films with just the right amount cut out to not get it, and why we have R films that are more or less PG-13 films where somebody wouldn't compromise, right? Where they're like, nope, not cutting that, So I mean, to me, that's the problem. I mean, I don't know that there's a solution, but there's a wide range of PG-13 and R-rated films, right? I mean, going from pretty dang tame to like extremes. So I think that cuts out the usefulness of the system for parents, which I think is the idea. But I don't have a solution, so I digress.
Yeah. And I feel like it's gotten even more muddled with streaming, right? Because now it's just like a lot of films that premiere on Netflix and other places, it's just like TVMA, or it's just like, and I think they can basically be like rated NC-17 for streaming, and they just call it MA. And it's not as big a deal.
It's complicated, and I mean, it's all an attempt to stop censorship, I guess. If you if you police yourself, if you have your own rating system, the idea is that the government's less likely to step in. I don't know how accurate that is, but that's I suppose the idea.
But back in 1971, this is 3 years into the MPAA ratings board, which started in 68. So in 71, there is no PG-13. That comes later in the 80s. And in 71, it's like PG, or might have even been called GP. I think in the beginning it was called GP, and then it later became PG. It might have changed by now, but basically it's like PG, which kids could go see, and then R. So I look at a scene like the end of Escape, which I won't give away, but like it's violence. Yeah. It's like a minute of like really horrendous, tragic violence at the end. You don't really see a lot of blood, but I'm watching that scene. I'm like, I wonder if there was a struggle to get that across the PG like rating, because that would be, I would imagine being like a 7-8-year-old in the theater in 71 watching the ending of this movie. And it would kind of scar me, I feel like,
I think so, particularly with like the tonal shift, right? I mean, I'd like to think that, and again, I was so young, I don't remember, but any parents that are aware of what this franchise was would be a little guarded taking their 7-year-old to it, because they'd be like, well, the entire earth was destroyed at the end of the second.
It's not going to be a comedy in the third one all the way through.
I mean, this is a movie about bigotry and animal abuse and all sorts of complicated things, and war. Hopefully they wouldn't take their 7-year-old, although having been in theaters with a lot of parents taking 7-year-olds to stuff they shouldn't see, I'm probably giving too much credit, but you're right. Yeah, I mean, especially with that tonal shift I'm talking about, this is kind of a fun little romp through 75% of the movie. I would say that ending, that's tough if you're a little kid. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that we get a little button. We get that last little twist in the final scene at the circus where you go, oh, okay. Like, so, because, geez, I mean, even the little one at the end, you're like, oh my God, this is horrific. So at least you get a little button at the end that shows, okay, something positive, something good might come from this. The series is not over yet. There's more to come
with Ricardo Montalban.
Ricardo Montalban, which we have not mentioned him. What did we think of him in this movie? Going to performances, what did we think of Ricardo Montalban, who's just in a short segment at the end?
I love him. I mean, I think he's great in that particular role too. I mean, that's a really cool character I mean, you'll see if you watch the film, they just throw him in at the end, but he's a really cool character. I think I like him. What screen time he gets, he makes the most of, and he's fun. Yeah.
He wouldn't have been as well cast in the villain role. That wouldn't have worked.
I don't think so. Although, I think he's got more range than people might think.
Yeah.
So maybe, but
yeah, I liked him in this. I think he's in the movie just the right amount. I think if he was in it from the beginning and he was like, all throughout the film, I don't know if it would work as well. I think once they get to the circus and that segment's really pivotal to the story, and then we get his presence there, I think that's what makes the most sense. I think if he had been in more of the movie, it wouldn't have worked as well.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I think the actors are really strong. As you said, Bradford Dillman and Natalie Trundy. I believe Natalie Trundy is in other installments of the original series. I think she might play an ape in one or two of the next sequels after this. So she's in a bunch of them too. But yeah, they're really warm. And you want Zira and Cornelius to trust in at least a couple humans at the beginning. And we really feel that with them. They're not there to just study them. They have a connection from the beginning. I think those are two really charismatic, warm actors. I think they add something great to the movie too.
I like all the performances in this film. Yeah. They're good.
I like the callback to the first movie when Zira kisses Bradford Dillman and she says, "You are the second human I've kissed." And then Cornelius says, "And you are the first." And he kisses Natalie Trundy. I like that little callback to the first movie too. Yeah. That was nice. It's kind of, I almost feel like that's like the last moment of levity in the movie until the tragic ending. And then it's like, oh, here we go. And then finally, I just think Kim Hunter and Roddy McDowall are so great. I think if they had not been able to get those two actors back for this, if they had gotten two new people to play the apes for the third film, it would have sunk it. I think we needed them back for this to work, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say since there's so much makeup. I mean, I do think they could have probably successfully found actors and actresses who looked enough like them that once you got the makeup on, the physical appearance wouldn't be off-putting. You know what I mean? But
true.
I love what you said about acting with the makeup, because I honestly hadn't thought too much about that. I mean, when you factor that into it, I mean, you're probably right. Like, not just anybody can do that. I mean, who knows? It's Hollywood, right? You got a billion super talented actors who are waiting to break. So I suppose anything is possible. But the one thing that's for sure is they are really brilliant in the role. I mean, even their voice work, right? Even if these were just animated characters, it's really good voice work. So
yeah, it would have been interesting if they had gotten two new actors in this third installment, if it had been Jane Fonda and Robert Redford under the makeup.
I mean, my honest answer is I don't know. I mean, I think visually you could have pulled it off. You could have made them, because I think with all the makeup, if you had people with just similar facial structures, which that wouldn't be that hard,
right?
You could make them look correct enough. What would happen with the performances? Well, that's anybody's guess. You'd have to have a pretty good mimic on the voices, but we know those exist. So
yeah, it'd be easier to take than like Julianne Moore as Clarice in Hannibal.
Yeah,
absolutely. Where you're like, okay, that's the same character of that Jodie Foster played. Okay. I'll be able to, and then the whole movie goes, and all you can think about is Jodie Foster. The whole movie, you're like, where's Jodie?
we're now having that with that TV series, Clarice. I don't know if you've watched that.
I've watched. I watched the first episode, and it didn't really pull me in.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I enjoy the series, but I did spend probably the first 3 episodes sort of reconciling that. I don't know. She's Jodie Foster. But after I got past that, I'm like, okay, it's a different actress. We're doing a different thing. It's cool. And I like the show, but I know what you're talking about, because I struggled with that the first, I'm like, oh, this is a different reading. I don't know.
So anyway, I'd love to know, like, was there any hesitation, like from Kim Hunter, like to come back for a third one? Did they just throw some money at her and she said, okay. Or did she pursue doing the third? I'd love to know. I couldn't find it. I did some research yesterday. I couldn't find like any quotes from her or McDowall about the third film. I'd like to know kind of what, were they immediately drawn into doing another one? Or you think, Kim Hunter might have been like, I've done two, I'm done, like I'm out. Maybe it really being about only them for the entire movie. I'm assuming that probably appealed to them. They're not in the background, especially like in the second one, they're kind of in the background. The third one, they're up front and center. And they probably went into it knowing how it ends. So they knew that, okay, I'm not going to be doing 8 more of these after, it's not Sam Loomis and Halloween. Like they know, even though Sam Loomis dies at the end of the second movie, he came back. I mean, so who knows what could happen, but I think that probably appealed to them, being the stars and knowing that this was going to be it.
Right. Well, and then you balance that against practical concerns as an actor, right? I mean, like you said, these movies all open at number 1. So, I mean, you are talking about, I would assume, a pretty lucrative role, lead role in a blockbuster movie franchise. So the money wasn't then what it is today, but it was still good money.
Yeah, exactly. Any other scenes we haven't mentioned from the movie that you liked? I'm looking over my list here. Any other scenes? The reveal that Zira is pregnant, I kind of was like, oh, okay, that's right. So the movie has to go in a new direction, and that's the way to do it, right? Is the reveal that she's pregnant. She like faints, and everyone's like, are you okay? And she's like, oh, I'm fine. I'm just pregnant. Everyone's like, what? Yeah. So I thought that worked pretty well. Any other scenes that we liked or disliked in the movie we haven't talked about?
I think those are the ones that really, I think we covered them. I had a problem with Cornelius's fight with the orderly that sort of sends him on the run. That just not that the fight couldn't have happened the way that plays out. I was a little bit troubled by. And we already discussed that. I love the reveal at the start when they step out of the spaceship and we figure out who they are. So no, I think you covered most of them. We mentioned Ricardo Montalban. I like the circus scenes that come toward the end, which we don't have to give too much, but I like
the reveal. We haven't talked about the reveal of when they find out that the apes can talk, right? When at the beginning they're like, we can't say anything. Who knows what they'll do? And she's like looking up at that banana, and they say, why isn't she taking it? And she looks at them, because I loathe bananas. And then Natalie Trundy faints. She's like, oh my God. I really like that moment. That's really great. That first courtroom scene where they're being investigated, I thought that was handled really well. Like it felt believable. I mean, maybe not so much when everyone's like clapping in the back. Yeah. Like when she asks, they ask if Cornelius can talk, and he says, only when she lets me. And the whole audience behind them breaks out in huge applause. I don't know if that's entirely believable.
Yeah, I don't know about the whole audience. I do get the feeling there'd be a reaction though. So,
that's true. Because they're like waiting. Like I'm assuming those people behind them, they know that, oh, we've heard that they can actually talk. Will we hear their voices, right?
Yeah.
And then there was one moment towards the end. It goes in a little bit of spoiler territory. I wanted to ask you about, Forrest, because I was thinking about this. So we get that lovely moment where she gets into the cage. She has her child, Zira, and she gets in the cage with that gorilla. And that, was it a gorilla or just like another ape of some kind? And that creature has a child of their own. And then based on how the movie ends, there is this like swapping. And I'm like, did she just take the other one, or did she because that, I feel like the other creature would have been like, you're not taking mine away. So did you have any thoughts on that moment? Because I mean, we need that to happen for the last button scene to work, but I was kind of feeling bad for the other parents.
I had thoughts, but I'm not entirely clear on what we're supposed to think, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
did she just take it, or because I'm not sure the movie's very clear about that.
I was wondering about that actually when we cut to the scene. I'm like, okay, they're in trouble. Is this what she's doing? And then I don't know. I mean, it's that she's dealing with a primitive ape as opposed to her, a much more advanced. So I don't know if she's just supposed to sort of talk him into it or what was happening, but
it's not in the film, her having that conversation. So we're gonna do a little play date. How about we swap? Because I'm like, I think the other one would be like, no. I'm keeping mine close to me. Maybe she turned around or something and didn't notice. I don't know, because they look exactly the same. But yeah, I think, I mean, to not give away, I mean, I think we've basically given away how this movie ends. I think if you don't know how this movie ends by now, but I just, boy, I mean, just all the handheld at the end, I thought worked really well. Like when the villain's running through like the ship or whatever it is, and we're getting a lot of really cool handheld, which I feel like we don't see a whole lot in the movie. It's a lot of like camera on sticks, but towards the end, Don Taylor allows for more handheld. And just, gosh, that shot of Cornelius before he falls, it's so tragic. It's so awful. We cut to Zira's, just her look of just sadness and just, despair. And then just that curling up their bodies against each other as the camera kind of goes out on a helicopter. Yeah, I've never been able to forget it since the first time I saw this movie, and still made me emotional watching it again. That ending just gets me.
Yeah, I think that's my main takeaway. Looking back at these movies, I forget how smart they were, which I think that's one of the things I sort of miss. And I'm not saying there aren't smart movies anymore, because there certainly are, but so often now the big blockbuster sort of summer movies like this seem to replace smart scripts and things with like, we'll have another explosion. No, we'll have another car chase. You know what I mean? And they look great, but it's almost to the point, since we've seen it all before at this point in 2021, that it's like, yeah, okay, but that didn't really add anything because we've seen that before. And these movies, they don't have all of that because we're dealing with more limited technology, but they have really good representational and thematic ideas that make up for it. And I think to some degree we're missing that, right? Like rather than having these really smart ideas act as a crutch for not being able to make a talking ape look perfect, now we make the talking ape look perfect and forget about everything else. Oh no, don't worry about the script, we got a talking ape, and I'm like, it was almost better the other way. So.
Yeah, I think the thinking today for a lot of filmmakers, a lot of studios, is just, we're going to lose the audience if it moves too slowly, if it's about ideas. We have to have action and stuff happening every 2 to 3 minutes. If a scene goes longer than 3 minutes, we've lost our audience. This thinking, right. not to say everybody thinks that, because there's so many great films every year that take its time and almost sometimes for the entire movie, for good or for bad. But especially the blockbuster event films now, you're not going to see a whole lot of moments like we see in the Planet of the Apes series, the original series. Occasionally we get an outlier, but you go see Godzilla versus Kong, you're not really going to see a whole lot of scenes of people sitting around and talking about ideas. It's like, get every young audience member is like, get to the battle. That's all we care about.
Nobody in that film pauses to talk about the collateral damage from Godzilla's tail, right? Yeah, he just wiped out about 350 people. But he punched, but he hit Kong. So.
But it looks great.
Yeah.
So my last question about Escape, as I ask of each guest for us, is if they were to make this story today, which is kind of a tough question because they've redone the Apes series recently. Like if they were to take this, like if they were to do an origin story of like two apes coming back in time from the future to, I guess, 2021 LA, they'd have to wear masks, right? The apes would unmasked. I'm waiting for that science fiction film where they have to like deal with the pandemic.
Oh, that's coming, no doubt.
Oh my gosh. Is Michael Bay Roland Emmerich gonna make a COVID $200 million?
Yeah.
like a Titanic or a Pearl Harbor, like COVID.
Variant 18, right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know. Yeah, I mean, like how television series and films for the next 5 years, are they going to just like ignore that this happened, or that's a whole other conversation.
I mean, your medical dramas have all jumped all over it if you watch any of those.
Yeah, I've watched a few, like The Connors. I watched The Connors on ABC, and Shameless just ended on Showtime. Both of those shows dealt with the pandemic in their new season. So some do it, some it's hard. Like we've been watching 911 on Fox, which we love, and every scene, they're paramedics, and every scene they're talking and they have a giant mask on, and it's like, right. There's some of them I'm like, well, we could maybe get away with a little bit of like some moments that, you know, I mean, obviously all the actors working in the production are probably vaccinated, or they're very, very safe. And so I don't know if we need the mask in every scene. Right. I would hope if they were to do Escape in 2021 that they wouldn't give the apes the mask, and then like the courtroom scene they have to like pull it over their mask, you know, a mask over the mask. But like how would that, you know, I mean, every film we talk about this part, I always say, well, it would move faster, right? Audiences today would not stand for kind of the slow pace of the 71 original. But anything else you think that would change if they were to reboot the series with this story with Zira and Cornelius in modern day Los Angeles?
Yeah, well, I mean, other than I have to wonder if they wouldn't change the ending today, if they would decide that would be troubling to modern audiences.
Okay,
change it in one. You know, I'm not certain, but I'm not convinced. I mean, this feels to me like a '70s ending. If you know what I mean. I mean, that was a gritty time for film where, you know, even though this is a fun film, there's a lot of gritty stuff going on, and I think there would be a great deal of discussion about that ending in 2021. So I will say that.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, I'm not saying they would get rid of it, but I bet they would alter it in some respects. You know? Something would change a little. You know?
I mean, it's hard coming off of the new trilogy that came out, I want to say 2011, 2014, 2017. Like, would there be a way to do a new Apes movie that wasn't so dark? Like, could they do something a little bit more lighthearted? That's almost something they've never done in the series before. You know, I wonder if they could make it not just this like bleak, like dismal story, like actually kind of have some fun with it and make it a little bit more lighthearted. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it would be especially if we're talking about the newer ones, like, you know, started in the you know, the really recent ones, that would be quite a tonal shift. So it's probably doable by some genius like Christopher Nolan or somebody. I don't know that I could do it. So.
I wonder if they'll do, because Disney owns 20th Century Fox now, right? So I wonder if like Disney Plus could ever do like maybe like a live action like series like they've done for The Mandalorian and WandaVision. Like I wonder if like, I wonder what there'll be another Planet of the Apes in the next 10 years. Right, There's going to be something. War from 2017, it had a very definitive ending that kind of connected to the other films. So I think that series is done, that main character of Caesar. But you know that there's so much stake in that title, right? Everybody knows Planet of the Apes, that there's going to be something else. I'll be curious to see where they go from here, because it has been 4 years. I don't know if anyone's working on a new project, but I'd be surprised if by the end of the 2020s, we don't get something new in that series.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
It seems like you'd have to.
But yeah, so I would give Escape, I would give it a solid 3.5 stars out of 4. I really love the sequel. I always have, since I think I saw it the first time in high school. It still holds up for me. As you say, there's a couple imperfect elements to it. The tonal shift towards the end, and a few moments like the death of Milo at the beginning, I think is a little clunky, but for the most part, I just love spending time with those two characters. Zira and Cornelius is the only film where we get to make them the main characters for the entire running time. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this sequel. If you haven't seen Escape ever, or it's been a long time, I'd say invest in the Blu-ray of the 5 movies. I don't think it's very expensive, and just watch these films again. They're a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I go a little lower than you. I give it a solid 3, but I mean, I still recommend it. I think it's fun. And like you say, I mean, I recommend the franchise. I've had fun delving back into it for this podcast. It's I mean, it reminded me, as I've said, of things about these films that I didn't remember the films being quite the way that they are, which is often, I think, when you have nostalgic remembrances of something, you delve back in, you're like, oh, okay, I didn't remember that. That feels different.
Yeah, absolutely. So that takes us to our final 2 segments. The first one is the Divine double feature. That's where we pick a more contemporary film that we would recommend people put on right when Escape ends for us. So after the tragic ending of this movie, what would you recommend someone put on right afterwards?
I had a tough time with this because I really thought about these movies in some respects are Shakespearean to me. So I actually thought about doing a Shakespeare movie, and I was like, just because of the themes involved, and I'm like, no, that's too. I've got to stick with something a little more fanciful. I toyed with Watchmen, the
Oh, okay.
2009 film, but I thought that's probably a little bit too dystopian, too dark. So what I ended up with was X-Men Days of Future Past from
Oh, okay. So
2014.
kind of a modern blockbuster about time and going back and forth. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, because I thought of the Watchmen movies. I mean, I thought that movie tonally hit the right note in that there's some really kind of funny stuff there with, watching Wolverine go back in time, but there's also some, serious stuff going on. It's still sort of a blockbuster, and that was my thinking on it.
Oh, that's a great touch. I only saw it the one time in the theaters. That was probably my favorite of the X-Men movies after X2, which came out in 03. There were things I liked about some of the prequels and other things, but what was so great about the 2014 version was you really got to see everybody, right? It's like the original cast and the new cast together.
Yep.
That was fun. And they even like reinvented like how certain relationships ended, and some characters who had died in previous films were like back alive at the end of the 2014 film. Yeah, that's a great choice. I went with it's celebrating its 20th anniversary this summer, and I just watched it again recently. I really like it, and that's Steven Spielberg's AI, artificial intelligence, which is another kind of science fiction film. It's it's not really about animal, but I the kind of the thematic tie is like a creature that we the human race don't fully understand. We can't fully get on board with them being just a part of our race. These robots that are created that all look like a very realistic boy. Kind of the last great Haley Joel Osment performance on film. He's so great in it. I love Jude Law in that movie too. And it was, that was speaking of Stanley Kubrick, right? That was like a Kubrick film that he never got a chance to make before his death, and Spielberg took it over. And I mean, it's at like Escape. It's imperfect. The ending still does not quite work for me, but there's so many great moments in that movie that just, I mean, some of the most striking work Spielberg's ever done. And I think it's worth another look if you haven't seen it before or it's been a long time. It's celebrating 20 years in June.
Yeah, really good choice. It's I reviewed that film when it came out in theaters, and I don't remember exactly what I gave it, but I remember talking about some of the things you did that it's not perfect, but it's awfully good. And and it does blend a vision of Stanley Kubrick and Steven Spielberg together, which that doesn't happen often, right? So how can you turn that down?
Yeah. And I always thought the very last 10-15 minutes of that movie, that was a Spielberg touch. Oh, the sentimentality, Spielberg's going there. Why didn't he end it with a little bit darker? And on the Blu-ray, I got the Blu-ray and watched the behind the scenes. No, that was Kubrick. Kubrick's version of how the movie should end is how the movie ends. That was not Spielberg. So we've all been blaming Spielberg for 20 years. And I'm like, that was Kubrick. That wasn't Spielberg. So I don't think a lot of people know that.
He was more sentimental than anybody thought.
Exactly. As The Shining proves, right? All right, so our final segment is called Beyond the Flick, and for this one, I thought we would just talk about the Apes series. There's 9 films. We haven't really talked a lot about the 3 new movies. What's your take on the new trilogy that came out in the last 10 years? And if you had to pick 2 or 3 favorites of the entire franchise, what would be your favorites?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I should just say I love the new trilogy that you mentioned with Caesar. I mean, I think everything about that franchise was good. I mean, I talked about the difference between the makeup we saw and Andy Serkis wearing motion capture. I mean, there is something impressive about having the apes look exactly like apes, but yet still get the expressiveness. So you can't go wrong with that. If you haven't seen the newer Apes movies, Planet of the Apes and Revenge, and I'm sorry, War for the Planet of the Apes, like you say, being the one that ended in 2017. If you have not seen that, then I think you should watch that entire franchise. Beyond those, I mean, I think the original Planet of the Apes, the 1968, the one that kicks it off, is still my favorite.
Agreed. Right? Yeah, still the best of all of them.
Yeah, the Tim Burton sort of jumped in there in the middle. That movie never really worked for me at the start. I mean, I love a lot of Tim Burton stuff. That movie's really not one of the Tim Burton movies I love. So I would I would skip that. You know, if I could only have one Planet of the Apes, I would probably choose the new trilogy that ended in 2017. I mean, I think that's sort of the definitive version for me. However, it's hard to say that and not pay homage to these originals, and I've had a lot of fun going back to the original. So you know, sort of like we've talked about here, I think watching the first three films from the original series, Planet of the Apes and Beneath and Escape from the Planet of the Apes is great fun too. To be honest, I may or may not have seen the final movies in that first. What do we were talking about this earlier? What do we call it? A quintology, or you know?
Yeah, so it's a quadrilogy if it's 4. What is it if it's 5? Quintology? Yeah,
yeah. It
5.
It has either been so long since I saw number 4 and 5 that I don't remember them, or I really don't feel like I can judge them. So I guess my main thing here, Brian, I'm saying, is stay away from Tim Burton, which I feel sad saying that, but yeah, stay away from that Tim Burton version.
That was probably my most anticipated film of the summer of 2001. I was like, okay, Tim Burton, who up until Planet of the Apes had never made a movie I didn't like from Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 85 to Sleepy Hollow in 99. I liked or loved everything he made, especially like Batman and Ed Wood. He did some really cool stuff. And then there's like this turn, 2001, Planet of the Apes. I just remember sitting there. I was with a bunch of friends and they all really liked it. They thought it was, and I'm sitting there like, no, like I was a huge fan of the original 68 version. I'm like, this one doesn't work. I mean, there were some moments here and there. I think Mark Wahlberg was really bad casting for the lead. He's just not very charismatic in that movie and just kind of stiff. And I mean, the ending's kind of clever. Like it's a different kind of twist than the first movie. Instead of using Statue of Liberty, using like the Abraham Lincoln monument. Like there's some stuff in it that I like, but I have never revisited. I've never watched it again. Maybe it's been 20 years. Maybe I should look at it again, but yeah, that one just didn't work for me. And then almost every movie Tim Burton has made since, I have not liked. So it's like this weird shift in his career where he just started going after like, let's redo Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Let's redo Dark Shadows. And it's like, you know, Big Eyes was pretty good. I mean, there's been a couple, but I don't know what happened to Tim Burton after Sleepy Hollow. It's been a rough go.
You'll be surprised by this, but I think I remember because we were talking at that point. I think I remember you before you saw that movie telling me, "Oh, well, Tim Burton's never made a movie that I don't like," and
probably.
And I remember that for some reason because I'm like, because
that's probably when we met. Yeah,
I started thinking back, and I'm like, yeah. I mean, I guess Brian's right. Everything he's made is pretty darn good. But yeah, then we both had sort of the same reaction from that. But yeah, so Tim Burton, 2001, stay away.
It is like this weird outlier because when I think of Planet of the Apes, I think of original series of 5 films, new trilogy, and then there's that other one that we don't really talk about. But yeah, I think you're right in that. In terms of quality, the new trilogy is better in terms of quality of the entire series, whereas the first series of 5 films, really by the 5th film, they're running out of ideas. The 5th film, I always forget the title. I think it's Conquest for the Planet of the Apes,
or Conquest of the Planet of the Apes.
Conquest of the Planet of the Apes.
I believe,
the 5th film from 73, you can kind of feel them running out of steam. The 4th film, not my favorite, has some interesting ideas. It's definitely worth a look if you're a fan of the original. But yeah, I would pick my 3rd favorite. It's close, right? Because I kind of think of Dawn and War as kind of close together. I mean, they're really kind of part of the same story. So I would pick my 3rd favorite as Escape, the film we talked about today. And then my 2nd favorite would be, my favorite of the new trilogy is Dawn, the 2nd one of the 3. I just think that movie is just phenomenal. So well done. Matt Reeves directed it, the guy who made Cloverfield and an underrated vampire movie I love, Let Me In, from 2010.
Yeah, that's great.
And he didn't direct the first one of the trilogy. He didn't direct Rise, but he directed Dawn and War. And I just think he is just a phenomenal director. I believe he directed the new Batman film with Robert Pattinson.
Yeah.
So yeah, Dawn is really fantastic. Even though the title should have been switched, the first one should be called Dawn. The second one should be called Rise.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that, but I just think the second film was just astonishing. I love the visuals in that, and such a great story. That part on the Golden Gate Bridge towards the end of the movie, so fantastically rendered and realized. I love the opening starting on Caesar's eyes and then ends on his eye. I mean, there's so many great details in that movie. But yeah, I'm with you. My favorite, if I had to take only one to Desert Island, would be the 1968 original. I just think it's such a great movie. You know, imperfect like some of these other ones we've looked at, but there's just something about that movie that I love. I saw it when I was very young, when I was like 10, 11, and it's just always stuck with me. It's very slow at the beginning. It takes a while to get there. But Charlton Heston, such a great casting choice for that movie. It's one of my favorite performances of his. I just love him in that, and the realization of that world and the big twist ending. I think the original is still the best after all these years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always tough to answer questions like that because I'm like, I think objectively, like we both said, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Dawn, and War, from 2011 to 2017. Objectively, I think they're the best movies, but those movies don't exist without that 1968 film, right? So, and it's a good film from 1968. So, yeah. I mean, it's still what you got to go back to, right?
Yeah. If you've only seen the new ones, you don't have to go back and watch all 5, but watch at least the first one from 68. It's really great.
Absolutely.
All right. So that takes us to the end here, Forrest. Thanks so much for being here today. If you could tell our listeners where they can find you online, that'd be fantastic.
Well, they can check me out at forresthartman.com is probably the best place. And I hope they do. And Brian, thank you so much. It's always great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. And thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.